Good afternoon, doctor. If I could have you raise your right hand.
Yes, sir.
Do you swear the testimony you're to give in this proceeding is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury?
Yes, sir.
If you'd have a seat and state your full name and spell your last name for the record.
Yes, sir. Mitchell Lewis Weinberg, Weinberg.
Oh, turn it over, Ding. Sorry.
Dr. Weinberg, where are you currently employed?
I'm employed at the New Hampshire Office of the Chief Medical Examiner.
And what is your current position there?
I'm the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for the State Medical Examiner's Office.
What are the duties associated with that position?
So what that means in practice is I am a forensic pathologist working for the State Medical Examiner's Office. There's quite a few things that I do to earn my weekly or my biweekly paycheck. A lot of them don't have any direct applicability to today, so I don't think I need to get into them. But the part that is relevant is that I am directly involved in hundreds of medico-legal death investigations per year, which often includes the performance of postmortem examinations by myself, that is, as in I do autopsies. I am a forensic pathologist, and while not everything you see on TV is correct, that part generally is. As a forensic pathologist, I am directly involved in performing forensic autopsies for the state of New Hampshire.
And do you have any specialized education, training, and experience to hold this position?
Yes, I am a board-certified forensic pathologist. What this means in short form is I went to university, and then I went to medical school, getting my medical degree. After that, I completed an anatomic pathology residency at Ohio State, followed by subspecialty training in forensic pathology at the Maryland Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. This is pretty much the standard path in the United States to become a forensic pathologist. I completed that training in 2012, at which time I was a board-certified forensic pathologist ready to enter the workforce.
And about how many autopsies would you say you've performed in your career, if you could just give a rough estimate?
At this point, has to be over 2,000. That would be a pretty conservative estimate.
Okay. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, what is actually an autopsy? How would you define that?
An autopsy is a postmortem examination. It is an examination using various surgical type techniques on a deceased individual. There's a number of purposes to an autopsy, but one of the primary ones is to determine an individual's cause and manner of death.
And now let me direct your attention to Friday, April 22nd of last year. As part of your duties, did you perform autopsies on the bodies of Mr. and Mrs. Stephen and Deswindy Reed?
Yes, I did.
Now, as part of your autopsy process, do you prepare a report?
Yes, at the conclusion of the autopsy and after additional ancillary testing comes in, one of the end work products for my cases is an autopsy report.
And do those reports, or at least as part of those reports, are those accompanied by both diagrams and photographs?
Photographs are taken in virtually every case that we do. Diagrams are a case-by-case basis. I do them when I think they will have value. In this case, in these cases, I know I did. In some cases, I don't, though.
what's marked for identification as states 55 through 68. Take a moment to review those. Let me know if you recognize them.
Sure. Yes, I'm familiar with the contents of this package.
And could you just describe what the contents consists of?
Yes, there are two diagrams that I produced showing on diagram form the location of the entry wounds, the entry gunshot wounds for Mr. and Mrs. Reed. Additionally, there is a sampling, certainly not all, but a sampling of some of the photographs I took during the two autopsies.
And do both the diagrams and the photographs fairly and accurately depict the wounds that you observed during your examination of Mr. and Mrs. Reed?
Yes, specifically these are external photographs only, so they don't show any of the internal findings, but yes, these are accurate representations of various aspects of each of their wounds.
Your Honor, the state would move to admit what's been marked for identification as states 55 through 68 into evidence as full exhibits and be published states 55 through 68, striking the identification.
Any objection?
May we affirm?
Yes.
As an expert in the area of forensic pathology in order to give his opinions on the autopsies in this case.
Any objection?
No objection to him giving his opinion.
Okay. Dr. Weinberg may give his opinions in this case.
And in light of that, the state really moves to admit exhibits 55 through 68 as full exhibits.
No objection.
Okay. Exhibits 55 through 68 are all full exhibits. And actually, if I could just have them back, have the file back, Doctor.
Yes, sir.
I just want to have the monitor strike the ID.
Dr. Weinberg, I'm going to start by showing you what's marked for identification or has been admitted as State's Exhibit 67. Would you describe for the members of the jury what this diagram consists of?
Yes, this is a diagram that I authored, meant to indicate the locations on Mrs. Reed's body of her two entry gunshot wounds. There were no gunshot wounds below the neck, therefore this is the only such diagram that I produced for Mrs. Reed's examination.
And I know, at least I mean, it was at first glance hard to see, but would you be able to point out using laser pointer
Yes,
where those wounds are located?
yes. So both of the wounds are very close, or basically are right around the right ear. They are arbitrarily numbered 1 and 2. That is not meant to connote anything other than just the random ordering I came up with during the exam. These are the locations of the two gunshot wounds to Mrs. Reed's body. One here, one here.
Okay. And again, that's there's, at least in this case, no way to discern the order of these two wounds.
That is correct. I do not have a way to distinguish which of these wounds was sustained first.
I'm showing you State's Exhibit 55 for the record. Could you describe the injuries that we see here?
Yes, this is a fairly close-up photograph of the right side of Mrs. Reed's head. So this is Mrs. Reed's right ear for reference. And there's a few different marks. So if I may, I'll go through each of them so that the court understands what each of these marks represent. So this mark here, this is gunshot wound number 1 in the diagram that we just went over. This is the gunshot wound that ultimately causes much more damage and was more acutely life-threatening, because this gunshot wound, the bullet entered the cranial vault. It basically went inside the head and directly injured Mrs. Reed's brain. This mark here on the ear and this mark here are part of gunshot wound number 2. This second gunshot wound first grazed the bottom of the right ear, and then it passed into the right side of Mrs. Reed's neck. This wound was much more superficial from an anatomic perspective. It did not enter the head, and it did not injure the deep structures of the neck. So what I'm saying is it didn't hit the vertebral column, the bones that hold the neck up. It didn't hit the spinal cord. It didn't hit any of the large blood vessels in the neck region. This is a relatively superficial gunshot wound that passed through the muscles, basically, of the back of the neck before it exited. This wound was not as acutely life-threatening, but it was part of the constellation of Mrs. Reed's injury.
I'm showing you State's Exhibit 56 for the record. Can you describe what this wound is?
So now we're looking at the left side. So this is my hand, and so towards the left side of the photograph, and where I'm pointing, this is Mrs. Reed's hair. So her head is this direction, just for anatomic reference, and this is the top of her back. This is the exit wound associated with wound number 2. So from that, it's clear to me as a forensic pathologist that this is a relatively superficial gunshot wound passing through the soft tissue, the musculature of the back of the neck.
And how are you able to discern the entrance wound from the exit wound?
I guess the honest, direct answer is my training and experience. Entry gunshot wounds and exit gunshot wounds generally look different. Entry wounds are generally cleaner. They're more punched out, whereas exit wounds tend to have a somewhat more irregular, ragged appearance. There's other things. You can follow the wound path internally, radiographically sometimes as well. In some cases, admittedly, it can be a little bit more questionable. In this case, it really isn't. I'm very confident that what we're looking at now is the exit wound, and what we were looking at previously was the entry wound.
Now I'm showing you State's Exhibit 57 for the record. Could you describe what we're looking at here?
Yes. This is a photograph meant to depict the wound path of gunshot wound number 2. This is something that we do as forensic pathologists, both to clarify wound paths for ourselves, but also these are demonstrative photos to stakeholders, such as juries, law enforcement, and attorneys, to demonstrate injuries. And the point I will emphasize again is the superficial nature of this particular gunshot wound, going from Mrs. Reed's right to left. This is only passing through the muscles of the back of the neck. It doesn't hit the spinal cord. It doesn't go into the cranial vault and injure the brain.
Of the 2 wounds, are you able to determine whether either of them was the cause of death in this case?
I chose to use the plural phrasing, multiple gunshot wounds, in this case, for reasons that I can get into if asked, but are not necessarily worth getting into. what I think is important for the court to hear is that gunshot wound number 1 was definitely the more acutely life-threatening gunshot wound because it is the one that damaged the brain. This one, while it caused some degree of injury, it was relatively superficial, didn't injure the brain, didn't injure the spinal cord, didn't injure any large blood vessels in the neck.
And if you could say, would the physical response to being struck by one or both of these shots be the result of just the body ceasing to function and drop to the ground?
If you could rephrase the question.
Which of these shots would have resulted in the body physically dropping to the ground?
I think you need to phrase it differently.
Okay. Would any of these shots have resulted in you basically being dropped, essentially, for lack of a better word?
Gunshot wound number 2 probably would not have caused a relative immediate incapacitation just because of what it didn't hit. Gunshot wound number 1 was potentially very quickly, if not immediately, incapacitating.
Now I'm showing you State's Exhibit 58 for the record. Can you describe for the members of the jury what this is?
Yes. So for gunshot wound number 1, the projectile was what I would technically term retained, as in the bullet remained in the head. There was not an associated exit wound. This is that recovered bullet that I recovered during my autopsy of Mrs. Reed.
And with something like this, what would be the next step in your protocol in terms of dealing with this, with a recovered bullet from somebody's body?
So I recovered the bullet, collecting as many of the larger pieces as is possible. Put it in, this is basically just a little Petri dish. And then we seal it up, we package it, we tape it, and we turn it over to law enforcement as evidence. What happens beyond that is their department, not mine.
Thank you. Moving on to it's marked for identification, or has been admitted as full exhibit, States 68. Could you describe for the members of the jury what this diagram consists of?
Yes, this is a diagram. Again, I'm the one who made this, and I made it for the purpose of showing where the entry gunshot wounds are to Mr. Reed's body. Mr. Reed was shot, I believe, 4 times. However, 2 of those wounds also re-entered the body. And what that means is they pass through one part of the body and then they pass through another part of the body. That just happens sometimes depending on where exactly the bullet goes and how the body is positioned when the individual is struck. So these are only the entry wound locations. This is kind of a busy enough diagram as it is, so that's how I did it. But in summary, there is, and again, to be clear, the numbering is arbitrary. I just picked numbering as I was going. It is not meant to indicate anything about the order of infliction, which I cannot discern, nor the severity of the specific wounds. But wound number 1 is here to the left wrist region. Wound number 2 first passes very, very superficially through the top of the left shoulder before it re-enters at the back left side of the head. Wound 3 first passes through the upper left arm, exits kind of in the left armpit region, and then pretty much immediately re-enters in the left armpit region on the chest side, and then passes through and causes injury inside the chest region. Wound 4 enters on the central back region, passes through the chest, and causes injury there.
I'm showing you what's marked, or what's States 59. Could you describe for the members of the jury this wound?
So this is one of the photographs I took to document gunshot wound number 1 to Mr. Reed's body. This is his left hand. This is his left wrist. The probe, again, same thing I talked about before. It's meant to demonstrate how the two wounds connect entry to exit. In this case, there wouldn't really be any question of that, but it's just something that we do anyway to document it. And so the probe goes through gunshot wound number 1 here, which did injure the radius, which is one of the bones of the forearm, prior to exiting the body.
This is State's Exhibit 60. Would you describe the injuries shown on this photo?
Sure. Again, there's a number of different things to see in this particular photograph. This is the first part of gunshot wound number 2. It passes very, very superficially through the top of the left shoulder. It is not technically, from a precise definition, a graze gunshot wound, but in effect, you should think of it as a graze type gunshot wound. It very superficially goes through the superficial skin of the top of the left shoulder, and then it doesn't show great here. There's better photographs, but the re-entry wound is in this approximate region. And then completely separately, this is the initial entry for gunshot wound 3. You can't see its initial exit, re-entry, or re-exit in this particular photograph. This wound is not something that's on the diagram. This is the exit wound for gunshot wound number 4.
This is State's Exhibit 61. Would you further describe this portion of gunshot wound number 2?
Yes, again, this is what couldn't be seen particularly well in the previous photograph. This is the re-entry wound for gunshot wound number 2. So this is Mr. Reed's left ear. He's face down in this photograph, just so that you're anatomically oriented. And this is where gunshot wound number 2 re-enters the body. It goes into Mr. Reed's head and causes significant damage to his brain.
This is State's Exhibit 62.
This is the associated exit wound for that gunshot wound number 2. So again, for reference, Mr. Reed is face down in this photograph. This is his right ear, and this exit wound is basically right behind his right ear.
This is State's Exhibit 63.
There's really nothing new in this specific photograph, just a somewhat different angle. There's a lot of redundancy in my world. We double up and triple up on things. So just a slightly differing angle. Again, this is the initial entry for gunshot wound 3. This is the exit for gunshot wound 4.
This is State's Exhibit 64.
Okay. This is not showing up as well as I'd hope, at least at my angle, but there's 3 defects visible here. This is the exit wound for 4 that we've talked about a couple of times now. This is that initial exit for 3 as it passes through the arm. So this is Mr. Reed's axilla or armpit region. And this is the re-entry for 3.
And last, this is State 65.
So in this photograph, there's a couple of things of interest to me. There's the entry for wound 4, the exit for 3, and this is an area of not greatly defined, but it's there, of yellowish dry abrasions to the right side of Mr. Reed's back. This is not gunshot wound trauma, though. This is an abrasion, which is the fancier word for a scratch or a scrape type injury. What's one of the interesting or relevant things about this particular area of abrasion, though, is its appearance. It's very yellowish and dry looking. It had a dryish texture when I examined it, and that is a feature that is often associated with post-mortem abrasions, as in injury, quote unquote, injury sustained after the patient is already deceased. So that could have some relevance.
And how are you able to discern between an abrasion that happens with living tissue versus post-mortem abrasions?
So one of the core tenets in forensic pathology is that when living tissue is injured, it bleeds. When tissue is injured where there is no blood pressure, it doesn't tend to bleed. So when an injury is without hemorrhage or ahemorrhagic, to use the more medical term, that is a finding that tells a forensic pathologist that this could be a post-mortem injury.
Would a post-mortem abrasion be something that would be consistent with a body being drug along the ground?
Yes.
This is State's Exhibit 66. Are you able to discern anything in particular about the injuries in this image?
Yes. So along with the gunshot wound that we've talked about, the other area of interest in this particular photograph is more yellowish, dry, and in my opinion, post-mortem appearing abrasions to the lower portion of the left side of Mr. Reed's chest, as well as his left upper abdominal region. So, right, he's on his back in this photograph. That's his right nipple for anatomic reference again. So this is kind of the left flank region, to use just more colloquial language. And again, there's this area of abrasion here that has a post-mortem appearance, in my opinion.
This is State's Exhibit 98. Could you describe for the jury what this
Yes.
depicting?
So these are some bullet fragments that I recovered near exit wound number 2. So while the bullet did exit for the most part, when a bullet passes through bone, it's very common for that bullet to fragment. And in some cases, most of the bullet mass can exit the body, but there can still be a little bit left. When I did x-rays as part of the exam, the bits of metal show up very, very easily on an x-ray. And so I did my best to recover as many of the larger pieces as possible for evidentiary purposes. So same thing as the last time I mentioned it. It's packaged up. It's turned over to law enforcement for them to do with it what they do.
Now, with respect to the 4 wounds that were identified for Mr. Reed, which number of them would have been fatal?
So out of Mr. Reed's 4 discrete gunshot wounds, all but the wrist wound would have been immediately life-threatening. The one that passed through the head injures the brain, and the 2 that passed through the torso each hit important anatomic structures in the chest region. There is collective total injury to both lungs, large blood vessels, the base of the heart region. So all but the one to the extremity would have posed an immediate threat to Mr. Reed's life.
Now, based on your examination of all the wounds, how many of the wounds did the actual bullet that caused the wound remain within Mr. or Mrs. Reed? Was it?
So for Mrs. Reed, there was 1 retained projectile. For Mr. Reed, may I refer to my autopsy report to be sure? Or,
Would that refresh your recollection?
yes.
And-
I don't want to get this wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for the
Absolutely.
record, it is marked, we have just for identification purposes, we do have
Just
a
when you're done reviewing it, just let us know, and then.
Yes, sir. Okay. So for Mr. Reed, they were all through and through wounds with no no core large bullets retained, just these small fragments. That's why that was all I recovered.
Okay, so were you able to discern how close the firearm would have been to the bodies based on the gunshot wounds in this case?
Sort of. What I mean is a standard part of any forensic pathologist's evaluation of a gunshot wound is to offer an opinion on range of fire. That refers to the distance between the tip of the weapon and the skin surface. And what I can say for each of these gunshot wounds that I've described and discussed for both Mr. and Mrs. Reed is that for none of them do I see visible evidence of close range firing on the skin surface. I always phrase it in the negative. I do not see evidence of close range firing on any of these gunshot wounds.
When we say close range firing, as a matter of distance, what are we talking about?
So when I say close range firing, I generally am talking about a distance of 3 feet or less.
Okay, so based on your examination, the firearm in this case would have been greater than 3 feet away from the wounds in this case that would have been, is that fair to say?
Objection, I think it misphrases what he testified.
Okay. How far would the gun have been away then?
So I can't differentiate whether a gun is 4 feet away or 14 feet away. All I can say is I don't see evidence of close range firing. Generally, that means the gun was at least, the tip of the weapon was at least 3 feet away from the skin surface at the time. There are some caveats when there could be an intermediary target, such as clothing, to consider. For Mrs. Reed's wounds, I don't really think that would be much of an issue to worry about because of where those entry wounds are, right? People don't have clothes over their right ear. For Mr. Reed, he did have clothing on at parts of his body that were struck. So sometimes clothing can impede that, but generally what I can say is there's no evidence from my perspective that the gunshot wounds were 3 feet or less range of fire.
What would you expect to see if the gunshots were within a range of 3 feet that would tell you whether the gun was actually within a close distance?
Sure. So in cases where there is evidence of close range firing, there's different things. It actually depends on where in that range between contact and 3 feet we're talking about. But the two general things that I'm looking for as a forensic pathologist to indicate close range firing are soot or searing around the wound. That generally indicates contact or near contact. That's extremely common in suicidal gunshot wounds, relatively less common in homicidal gunshot wounds. Or something called stippling, and that basically refers to little micro abrasions from unburned gunpowder particles that travel down the weapon along with the bullet, and between about 6 and 36 inches, those little powder particles can abrade the skin and cause something that we call stippling. They look like grain of sand sized abrasions around an entry wound. And so none of those findings are present in this case.
Now, based on your examination of the wounds in this case, are you able to discern the caliber of the bullet that would have caused the wounds?
No, that is not my role as a forensic pathologist.
Are you able to discern the number of shots that would have taken to cause the 2 wounds that were described to Mrs. Reed and the 4 that were described to Mr. Reed?
Again, sort of. What I mean is there are 2 gunshot wounds to Mrs. Reed's body, and there are what I believe are 4 discrete gunshot wounds to Mr. Reed's body. 2 of those wounds involve re-entry. For the one that goes through the left arm and then into the chest, I think it is virtually impossible that it's not a single bullet that does that. I'm quite confident in that. For the one that goes through the left shoulder and then into the head, It is absolutely my best professional opinion that it is a single projectile that is responsible for that constellation of injury, but it is not completely impossible that that is, in fact, 2 discrete gunshot wounds. To be clear, that is not my opinion. I think Mr. Reed was shot 4 discrete times. And so if you just add those 2 up, we're talking about 6. But it's my job as a forensic pathologist to consider all sorts of different possibilities. It is not impossible for a single bullet to have struck both of these victims. I do not have a way to discern their precise positions with respect to the gun, with respect to each other at the time their injuries were sustained. And so it is plausible that one bullet could have caused injury to both individuals. So in that sense, I think we're talking about an absolute minimum of 5 and a maximum of 7. But my best opinion is probably 6.
Thank you, Doctor. Just with respect to this last exhibit that's still on the screen, as with the bullet, is this basically a piece of evidence that you would have also turned over to the police for further processing?
Yes.
I guess in conclusion, what is your formal opinion as to the cause and manner of death of Mr. and Mrs. Reed?
For both Mr. and Mrs. Reed, the specific cause of death phrase that I used was multiple gunshot wounds. And for both individuals, my opinion on manner of death is homicide.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Just a housekeeping thing. I don't think formally Exhibit 98 was moved in as a full exhibit. Any objection to 98? Which is one being shown to the jury right now, being marked as full exhibit.
I apologize.
Okay, 98 is also a full exhibit. Cross-examination?
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon again, ma'am.
You remember me? You and I had a formal conversation quite a while back.
From the deposition, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So, during the course of the deposition, and so the jury understands, it's a way for me to ask you questions to try and understand what it was that went into the autopsy and the report, right?
Right.
And during the course of the deposition, do you recall doing a chart for me with different colors of the approximate path of each of the bullets?
Yes, and I remember, my memory was refreshed as I was reviewing the deposition transcript in preparation for today.
Okay. And I'm going to show you a copy of that color-coded chart that you did for the entry and exit wounds on Mr. Reed. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And is that the chart that you drew for me during the deposition?
Yes.
I'd like to enter this now as an exhibit, Your Honor. It has not been marked.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
We just need to give that, let me see, where are we? This 1159? 1159? Oh, 1160, okay.
Thank you.
1160 is a full exhibit.
Can't talk until she's done. Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions about all the wounds, but when it comes to the order of wounds, I'm going to refer to the different codings that you have marked, color coding, sorry, on this chart, okay? Because
Okay.
each of the wounds on this chart, you've tracked right to left the path of the bullet as well as the entry and exit, right?
Right.
And if I may publish so
Of
that
course,
they see
absolutely.
what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I don't have a big one. Okay, so I'm sure nobody at a glance understands what's on this chart, so we're gonna unpack it. But first, for the autopsy of Mrs. Reed, one of the things that you do is, do you have the clothes removed or do you remove them?
Me with my assistant.
Okay, so first you weigh the body with clothes on,
Yes.
and then you remove the clothes and you check the clothes, right?
To some extent, yes.
Okay. One of the things that you're looking for might be defects on the clothes that match a location of a bullet wound.
Yes.
And, but you don't actually do any microscopic examination of the clothes.
No, I do not.
So you don't check to see if there might be stippling on the clothes.
No, I do not do that.
But you preserve the clothes in as good or best position that you can, so that you haven't altered the evidence in any way.
Correct. We try very hard to get the clothing off in a way to preserve evidence.
And you use gloves so that you don't transfer any sort of evidence from you or your assistant onto a body that you're conducting an autopsy on. Or
Correct.
clothes.
That's correct.
So Mrs. Reed was 179 pounds as she came in, and I noticed, by the way, that you're looking at your autopsy, which does not bother me, but you have to announce when you have to check.
Okay.
Just so that we know when you're doing that. It's totally fine, but I agree.
Yes, I'm going to refer to my autopsy report and, based on your question, I think my notes as well, to confirm the accuracy of what you're saying.
Okay.
So yes, that is correct. As received, Mrs. Reed's weight was 179 pounds.
And then when the clothing was removed, she was 167?
Correct.
And so that difference in weight might be clothing, it might be condition of clothing if it's damp, things like that, right?
Yes, often a discrepancy of that much is due to wet clothes.
Okay. And were the clothes wet?
I honestly don't remember, and I don't have it in my notes, so I don't want to, I don't remember.
But that was a significant difference of weight. So due to clothes and maybe some dampness or moisture in the clothes.
In all likelihood, yes.
Okay. And then Mr. Reed was 159 pounds before you removed any clothing, and 143 once you did.
Again, I'm now going to refer to the file for Mr. Reed to confirm that. But yes, those numbers are correct.
And Mr. Reed was 68 inches, which equals
5'8".
5'8", and Mrs. Reed was 64 inches, which is,
5'4".
I'm letting you check to confirm.
Yes, in imperial units, those are correct measurements.
Okay, so she's about 4 inches shorter than Mr., did I get the numbers right? Yeah, 4 inches shorter than Mr. Reed.
I agree.
Okay. The injuries, the gunshot wounds to both of them were fatal,
Yes.
and they were fatal pretty quickly.
Yes.
I think I asked you, I think that you had said that it was seconds to minutes before they were dead.
That would be, yes, my best estimate. And there's a difference between, right, incapacitation and when the patient is technically deceased.
And they were probably incapacitated very quickly.
Yes, both victims have gunshot wounds to the head with injury to the brain. Such injuries often, not always, but often are virtually immediately incapacitating.
Okay. One of the other early things that you do in the autopsy is to collect evidence from the outside of the body.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, I guess I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Fingernail clippings.
Oh, yes, in some cases. These are discussions that are generally held by myself and attending law enforcement officers. We very much err on the side of if this might even possibly have evidentiary value at some point in the future, do it.
And DNA.
In what sense?
Did you collect the blood card for the DNA?
You mean the blood card standard?
Uh-huh.
Yes, that gets created and turned over to law enforcement as part of the evidence. That's that's drops of blood on a filter paper so that laboratories have the DNA profile for the individuals that were autopsied.
Can't see through these, so I guess you wouldn't know what's inside of these envelopes from your notes, right?
I mean, I know what should be in there and that kind of thing.
Okay, well, anyway, you collect evidence of their DNA to be able to pass on to the police to have tested in whatever manner they see fit.
Yes, that's the general idea.
Okay. And then you do the outer examination of the body,
Correct.
and that's when you make notation of the appearance of the body from the outside.
Correct.
And you talked about abrasions. That's about the time that you are making observations about abrasions.
Yes,
Right.
well, we talked about Mr. Reed's abrasions thus far.
Mrs. Reed had some abrasions as well, right?
I don't think I'd phrase it in the plural. I believe it was just a single one on Mrs. Reed, but yes, Mrs. Reed had an abrasion to her back
Okay.
as well.
I guess I think of just a scrape, but where on the back was Mrs. Reed's abrasion?
On the right side of the lower back.
Right side of lower back?
Yeah, a little bit higher than where your hand is right now, but maybe a little higher, but that general ballpark.
Okay.
Yes.
And that was post-mortem, meaning that occurred after death?
You're asking me, do I believe that abrasion was... Yes, the appearance of the abrasion on Mrs. Reed's back had that similar yellowish dry appearance that we saw earlier during Mr. Reed's exam. And yes, my opinion is that that abrasion was probably post-mortem as well.
Okay, and Mr. Reed had abrasions on his back?
He had some abrasions on his back and some on the front as well.
Okay. So the abrasions on the back were?
For Mr. Reed,
Yeah.
right side, it was a larger area, but central to lower back, basically mid-back to just above the buttocks.
Okay, and then on the front?
On the front, it was mostly lower left costal margin, so the rib cage, the lower portion of the left side of the rib cage, and then there was a smaller one on the right side of the rib cage as well.
Okay. And did you discern whether or not any of them could have been from being dragged?
I'd respectfully disagree with the verb choice. It's not my place to discern. I'm not trying to sound disrespectful. These are post-mortem appearing abrasions on Mr. Reed's front and back.
So it's something
is-
coming in contact with his skin after death?
Yes, it is.
Expectations.
It is my job to offer opinions and some answers. I don't think I can specifically, precisely say that they must be from dragging, but as I answered earlier, these findings, these injuries are certainly consistent with such a scenario, and that's all I mean to convey with my answer.
Okay. And around wrists and ankles, you did not discern any sort of injury that would necessarily be indicative of dragging, grabbing in those areas and pulling the body weight, but you wouldn't necessarily see that.
Yes, that statement as phrased, I would very much agree with.
Okay. And I want to talk about lividity.
Okay?
Could you tell the jury what lividity is?
Yes, lividity or livor mortis is the postmortem settling of blood after an individual dies. Once we die, we no longer have a heartbeat, and physical forces take over. Blood will start to pool simply based on gravity. So the pattern of that pooling of blood or lividity can, in some cases, provide information about the positioning of a body when found. It can sometimes help provide information about if a body may have been moved, if there's a lividity pattern that's inconsistent with the position in which the body is found. So that's what lividity is.
And what were your observations on livor mortis with Mrs. Reed?
So again, I'm referring to my autopsy report. For Mrs. Reed, I describe her lividity as being over the anterior surfaces of the body. So that basically means the front of the body, the chest, the belly.
Okay. So chest and belly. And then it's not like a consistent color where there's lividity,
No, not necessarily.
and certainly where portions of a body are having contact with something, it has a different appearance, even though it may be the lower portion of the body.
Yes, you're referring to a phenomenon we call contact pallor. It's exactly what it sounds like. If the body is pressed against the ground, you see paleness in that area rather than lividity.
Okay, so when the jury is looking at some of those pictures, there are red marks in there that are not necessarily abrasions, they may be the lividity.
Yes, that's certainly possible.
So they have to rely on your description of where the abrasions were, less than the pictures that show a lot of red color.
I mean, I don't want to tell the jury what to do. That is part of what I do when I'm performing my exam. And as a forensic pathologist, I generally can differentiate an abrasion from lividity.
Okay, and I think that you testified that you saw consistent lividity consistent with Mrs. Reed being on the anterior of her body,
Correct?
which would be consistent with being face down for a period of time after she died.
Yes, long enough for the lividity to develop and set.
So let's talk about that timing.
Okay?
You said that sometimes lividity tells you something about when or if a body has been moved.
Sometimes it can, yes.
Because over time, lividity will fix, so that if lividity is on the anterior part of the body, you can turn a body over and the blood won't then go to the back.
Yes, if that fixing has occurred, if the body was face down long enough for the lividity to fix, and then the body was moved and placed on the back, the lividity on the front of the body would remain. And this is the kind of thing that people in my world are trained for. And if we see a body found on the back with overt lividity on the front of the body, that's a bit of a, hey, this isn't right. Let's look into this further. And oftentimes there's a benign explanation, like if somebody's found, for example, face down next to their bed, it's a very common and natural reaction that somebody's going to turn them over to check on them. And that's often what it is in benign cases, but that inconsistency, that's what we're looking for as death investigators.
Okay. And then there is another phenomenon before lividity gets fixed, where lividity can start in one area of the body, and over time, if that body is moved to a different position, the lividity can remain where it started, as well as move to where the body ended up.
Yes, that can happen in some cases.
Okay, and then there is, if the body hasn't been moved at all, sorry, starting over. When a person dies, they can be moved right away, and if it hasn't gotten to that time period where it starts to fix on one thing and moves to a different position, or if it's fixed altogether, that you couldn't tell.
You mean the initial position the body was in? That's correct. I'd have no way to discern that.
Okay, so let's talk about the timing between those types of things and when they happen.
Okay.
The lividity can move without you being able to discern anything about positioning within a couple of hours.
You're saying how long before the lividity starts to develop? Generally a few hours, yes.
Okay, and then after a few hours, it is fixed. I think about 6.
Yeah, I'd have to look. I'm trying to think the exact kind of textbook. Now, I mean, I think a few important caveats. One is there are textbook answers, but real life is often not necessarily the textbook. I think 6 to 8 is the ballpark at which point lividity starts to fix.
Okay.
But again, that's also making certain assumptions about temperature and ambient conditions, things like that, which may or may not be the case in a particular incident.
Okay, so let's talk about this. Did you see any sign that in the lividity that Mrs. Reed's position had changed, in the lividity only?
I did not see a secondary pattern of lividity on Mrs. Reed's body, no.
And the same with Mr. Reed?
Refer back to my notes for him. No, I don't have any indication of a secondary lividity pattern for Mr. Reed either.
Meaning that they probably ended up at their recovery site within at least within a couple of hours after death.
I don't know if it's my place to comment on that. I think what I can say is whatever position they ended up in, they presumably had to have gotten there relatively soon after their death, within no more than a few hours. Otherwise, there may have been a secondary lividity pattern to have been seen.
Okay. And you did not see a secondary lividity pattern in either of them?
No, although I do think it is worth emphasizing that Mrs. Reed was a pretty dark-skinned woman, and in darker-skinned individuals, lividity can be more difficult to pick up. I mean, it just is. You know, I've spent my career working with different ethnicity populations, and folks that have darker skin, the lividity is just tougher to see. It's the human eye.
Okay. So you can't entirely rule out a secondary lividity site, but the lividity that you observed was on her stomach
Correct.
or,
Or anterior.
and if she was found face down upon recovery, is that consistent with, was her lividity consistent with that position?
Yes.
And meaning, okay, not meaning. Mr. Reed, his lividity was on his posterior,
Correct.
and if he was found at the recovery site face up, the lividity is consistent with him being there at some point after death,
Yes, that's correct.
within hours of death.
Again, fast enough that I did not see a secondary lividity pattern.
Okay. So now I want to look at the gunshot wounds, and I don't have a big chart, sorry, so I'll do what I. So we will talk about Mrs. Reed's gunshot wound.
Okay.
And to understand them, you have to go through these kind of details, right?
Yes.
Trajectory
Oh.
and all that stuff, right?
Yes.
So, I believe that you said the, 2 shots to her head were from right to left.
Correct.
And one of the things that you can also do in looking at entry wounds is sometimes tell if the entry was at an angle, right?
I mean, to some extent. So when I describe a wound path, I describe it in all 3 axes, left, right, up, down, front, back. So information about the angle is obtained from the wound path as well as some of the features of the entry wound.
And one of the ways that the entry wound can give some clues is if there's a sharp angle into the entry, there might be an abrasion where more of the bullet is touching the skin before it enters a body.
Yes, you're referring to something that we term marginal abrasion.
And so that can give you some information about the position of perhaps the muzzle to the body.
Well, no, not really the position of the muzzle to the body. I mean, if you're talking about distance, no. The marginal abrasion doesn't speak to the distance. Marginal abrasion and the wound path can provide information about the angle that the bullet traveled in the body.
So that the angle, unless there's a secondary entry, what do you call it?
Re-entry?
No, when something's in between.
Oh, intermediary target.
Unless there's an intermediary target, if the angle is, if a bullet goes in at an angle, you could sort of follow the angle back to figure the direction of the muzzle to the wound.
I mean, yes, generally speaking, right? Bullets travel straight in the absence of an intermediary target. And, you know, they don't curve or do magical things. Bullets travel straight. And so potentially that information could be used. But I think the point to emphasize is it also requires certain assumptions. So to be clear, I can't definitively say the position of the individuals at the time they're struck either. I can't tell the position of body parts at the time they are struck, at least not precisely and not perhaps to the level of detail that a court may want. So All of these questions can start to get fairly complex fairly quickly.
Okay, I'm talking general, and these are actually clues that you look for, and if you see them, you write them down, like the marginal
Yes,
abrasion.
marginal abrasion is part of a gunshot wounds description.
And in Mrs. Reed, did you note any marginal abrasions in the entry wounds?
Yes. So for the first, for gunshot wound that we've been talking about as number one, the one that's slightly more forward and the one that does the more damage, there is a almost 2 centimeter wide marginal abrasion towards anteriorly, so going towards the front of Mrs. Reed's body.
And there's sort of one wound on top of the other. Are you talking about the top entry or the one entry wound underneath it on the ear?
Wound one is higher up. It's more towards the front and it's higher on the body.
And which has the marginal abrasion?
Wound one does. I haven't commented on wound two. Wound two does have a marginal abrasion, but it's circumferential. There's no angle to it, so it's the same width the whole way around. Whereas wound one has the asymmetric or eccentric marginal abrasion.
Okay, so the pattern is from right and to left up a little bit on wound number one?
I need to check my notes on that. It's fairly flat.
Okay, so a little bit of an angle, but not very much.
Well, there's a bit of an angle towards the back of the head, but there's very little up-down deviation between where wound one enters and where the core of the bullet is recovered from.
Okay, so very little up and down, sort of straight through, like a straight entry?
Well, no. I mean, I guess if you want me to point,
Yeah.
it's more like enter and bullet recovered more towards the back of the head, the occiput. So that's what I mean by it's fairly flat. It doesn't go up or down very much. It's right to left, but it is backward. So from a more frontward position towards a more backward position.
Okay, and then the one below that went through her neck also on the right side,
Correct?
and also right to left.
Correct?
And was it the same path?
Pretty similar, yes.
Okay. So, does that tell you anything about any sort of change in position of Mrs. Reed or the shooter or the gun between the two shots?
Well, I mean, I would have to make an assumption that they occur very close in time. If I make that assumption, it suggests that they occur in pretty rapid succession because there isn't a ton of change between the two gunshot wounds. Their entries are fairly close. They have similar wound paths. One of them is a little bit more forward, and so it goes into the head and causes major damage. But again, that is an assumption that they occur close in time that I can neither confirm nor refute based on my examination alone.
Okay. So then the wound to the neck went in on the right side of the neck and exited on the left side of the neck.
Correct.
And also right to left.
Correct.
And Mrs. Reed is about would there be some change in the path of the bullet by passing through the body?
In what way are you asking the question? I'm sorry. I'm not.
Angle, velocity, does the passing through the body when there is no bony structure, will that change the path of the bullet at all?
Generally, it shouldn't change the path very much when a bullet passes through soft tissue only. There would certainly be a loss of velocity and a loss of kinetic energy to some extent, but without hitting a bony structure, the actual angle, I would not expect much deviation from passing through soft tissue only.
Okay. And Mr. Reed is 4 inches taller than Mrs. Reed.
64. Correct?
And-
Yes.
And he had, I said I was going to do it in the order of the chart, but I start out wrong. He had a bullet wound on the left side of his shoulder.
Not so much the left side of his shoulder, it's really the very top of his left shoulder.
Sorry, left shoulder is really.
But correct, yes, it's the left shoulder. Yes, ma'am.
And from that bullet wound, it went into his head.
Yes, that is my opinion.
And I think you're qualifying it, that is my opinion, because it's possible his head was forward and it could be 2 different bullets, but you believe that it was just one bullet that caused both of those wounds.
Yes, it's certainly my role as a forensic pathologist to admit that it is possible, but based on my exam, based on looking at the wounds, when I was in the autopsy suite, looking at the precise wound path, using those probes to see exactly how things line up, my opinion is that the injury to the left shoulder and to the head is from a single bullet, a single gunshot wound.
Okay. And so let me go with the order of wounds as you've done on the chart that
Okay.
will be going back to the jury. You have marked as number 1 in sort of a burnt sienna color on the chart. I'll give you the chart if you'd like to confirm the color. An entry wound into the back of the left hand,
Wrist,
and the exit wound out the other side.
correct.
And that's probably too small of a distance. Oh, actually, it hit the bone there, didn't it?
It does. This injures the radius, correct.
So that can change the angle,
Correct.
and it can fragment the bullet.
Yes.
And did you see any marginal abrasion there to give any indication of whether that was an angled shot or not?
There was some marginal abrasion around this one. There was some angling. I think the other thing that's important to emphasize with extremity shots is it is very difficult, if not impossible, to know exactly what the position of that extremity was at the time the wound was sustained. So this diagram, this chart, is something that we call the standard anatomic position. It's how we describe wounds in North America as a matter of convention, but I don't know what position Mr. Reed's left upper extremity was in at the time that gunshot wound was sustained.
Sure. So which area was the marginal abrasion in?
Well, it was around the 3 to 6 o'clock position is the convention. So the part of the wound closer to the hand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
3 to 6, so.
Yeah, the top is 12 o'clock by convention. So
So, a little bit of an angle, but if the hand is up here, or the hand is down here, or the hand is like that, the angle might remain the same, but you can't tell a thing about where the hand is.
that is correct.
Okay. And that was the left hand. Then, what did I mark as 3?
3 is purple, I think.
3 is purple, and, right, okay, so let's talk about 3.
Okay.
3 is the one that you believe was re-entry?
Well, so 3 first goes through the upper left arm, kind of in the left side of the arm, out basically the upper armpit on the arm side, re-enters the chest on the upper armpit chest side, passes through the chest. That's what this line on the diagram, I mean, right, this is a 2D diagram trying to depict a 3D phenomenon, and I am not remotely artistic, so please, my apologies. This is meant to be demonstrative, not disrespectful. And then that bullet exited on the right side of Mr. Reed's back.
Okay, so it exited somewhere around here?
That's the ballpark, a little higher,
A little higher there, okay.
but yes, that's the right general ballpark.
So it entered the arm on the shoulder, lower,
Upper arm, low shoulder,
okay.
yes,
Went through and exited and re-entered along the side
correct?
and continued traveling to exit in the upper back.
Yes,
Again, that was left to right.
yes. As well as, in this case, front to back.
Because it entered in the front part of the chest area but exited out the back.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
An angle to that, or was it pretty much a straight path?
Let me check my measurements. 32. Now this one goes down a bit. There's about 10 centimeters or 3 inches of downward deviation between where it enters the chest and where it exits the back.
Okay, and is there a marginal abrasion on that entry wound?
Yes, there was a concentric, which means that's my description for it's the same all the way around of 3 millimeters. So not really angled.
Okay. And again, that can tell you something about the bullet entering the body, but it can't tell you anything about the body position at the time that the bullet enters, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then the next injury, bullet wound,
Wound 4, you mean, ma'am?
please.
So wound 4, I mean, which aspect of it are you interested in?
Why don't you describe it first, and then I'll ask some questions.
Okay, so that one enters on the central back region. Again, there is a concentric marginal abrasion, 2 millimeters this time, but same, so not much angle on the marginal abrasion, but the wound nonetheless goes from the center back out through the left side of the chest, injuring significant anatomic structures, causing bleeding in the chest, that kind of thing, before exiting the body.
So what direction is that?
So it's back to front, as well as right to left.
Okay.
Back to front and right to left.
Back to front, right to left, so if it's in the center of the back-ish, and exits,
A little bit to the left of the left nipple.
okay. All right. That's a different path than the other 3, correct?
I mean, it's the only one that enters posteriorly, yes.
And
Well, other than the wrist, but we talked about why that you have to take with a grain of salt.
And it's moving from a right to leftish path rather than left to right.
Right to left, and 4. Correct.
And that might suggest a change of position between receiving the wounds.
Yes, that's not uncommon with multiple gunshot wound cases, right? Shootings are not static events. They don't occur in a single instantaneous moment in time. Victims move, whether of their own volition as they're trying to defend themselves or avert getting shot, or they can be physically moved by the energy of a gunshot wound itself. And that's saying nothing of potential movement by the shooter. So yes, it's not uncommon for me to see multiple gunshot wound cases where the entry wounds are in various parts of the body.
Okay. And here, with 3 wounds going left to right and 1 having more of a right to left path, that's a pretty clear indication of either movement of the shooter with the gun or movement of the body.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. And then on distance, distance you said is measured not from the shooter to the victim, it is measured from the end of a gun.
Yes, that's the only thing I can comment on, right? I obviously can't tell if if a shooter is holding a gun close to their body or further out. So what I can offer evidence on is the distance between the tip of a weapon and the skin surface on a victim.
Not a gun, but I'm not going to point at the drug. So a gun could have been as close as here to the wood-ish. About 3 feet.
I mean, I don't have a measuring tape, but that seems to be in the 3-foot-ish ballpark to my eye. Yes.
Been farther away.
Yes, I'll say again, I have no way to distinguish between 4 feet, 14 feet, 24 feet, etc. Once you get beyond that evidence of close range firing for the kinds of gunshot wounds we're talking about, there's no distinguishing.
Okay, so as close as 3 feet-ish and farther away you can't tell.
Yes, I mean, I guess I would stand by my earlier statement, which is I see no evidence of close range firing on the entry wounds, the initial entry wounds for either Mr. or Mrs. Reed.
Okay. And you said that you couldn't determine caliber of bullet that you located in the body.
Yes, I'm not a ballistics expert.
Right. But you did save, we saw the pictures, you did save the bullets from the body, or the fragments that you were able to recover, right?
Which patient are we talking about, ma'am?
Well, I will start with Mrs. Reed.
Well, for Mrs. Reed, it was pretty much the core mass of the bullet,
Okay.
because there was no exit wound. So, I mean, there may have been very tiny little fragments that are just kind of impossible to recover, but the jacket and the core were recovered.
Okay. Do you recognize what's in here?
Yes, I do.
What is this?
May I take a look, just to verify? Yeah, that is the bullet that I recovered during the exam from Mrs. Reed's head.
Okay, and this is exhibit 1018 for ID. I'd like to move for it as a full exhibit.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
1018 is a full exhibit.
Does anything in the entry wound tell you the caliber of bullet?
No. my training as a forensic pathologist and my practice is that commenting on bullet caliber from an entry wound is bad practice. It's just, you don't do it. I can get some rough idea of whether I'm dealing with a really small bullet, such as a .22, versus a larger bullet, but to be precise as to bullet caliber, I can't do it. It's not, in my opinion, doable. And that's why you recover the projectile and send it to a crime lab for analysis.
So, you can't tell if the wounds on Mr. Reed were caused by the same caliber of bullet as Mrs. Reed?
No, I have no opinion on that question.
You can't tell if the same gun that shot the bullets that caused the injury on Mr. Reed shot the bullets that caused the injury on Mrs. Reed?
No, I cannot.
You can't tell the position of the Reeds at the time that they were shot?
Certainly not precisely. There's some things I can offer opinions about, but not in any great detail, no.
Were they standing?
Were they standing? I don't think I can say. I think they could have been, but I can think of scenarios where they wouldn't necessarily had to have been standing. No.
Okay. So that's beyond what you do. I don't mean to ask anything beyond an opinion that you're comfortable with.
I mean, you ask, and I'll tell you if I can offer an informed, reasonable opinion. In this case, I don't believe there is evidence that allows me to offer a professional, scientifically based answer to the positioning of Mr. and Mrs. Reed when they sustained the gunshot wounds.
Okay. Likewise, you can't determine the position of the shooter?
Again, certainly not to any precise level of detail. I can say certain things, right? Because we've talked about how bullets travel straight, and I know where entry wounds are and things like that, but not to the level of detail that I think you're alluding to, no.
Okay. You went to the crime scene in this case, right?
Yes, I did.
And what was the day that you did the autopsy?
Check my notes. I did the autopsies on April 22, 2022.
And that was a couple of days after their deaths, right?
Well, the date we believe to be their deaths. It was the day after their bodies were discovered.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And when you went back to the scene, that was about a month later.
That sounds about right, yes.
And you were actually taken down to the recovery site?
I was.
So you were able to see where the bodies were and people were describing to you the positions that they were in?
Yes.
And when you came back from the recovery site to Marsh Loop Trail, one of the people in the party there walked around a tree and made an exclamation of sorts, right?
You're asking now my recollection of those events, more fact type stuff than...
Without saying what anybody said, was there a reaction when somebody went around the big tree that other people started paying attention to right off that trail?
I don't remember exactly what happened, but yes, I remember other members of the party seemed to be reacting to something.
Okay. And did you remain?
Very briefly, but that was towards the end of my part. I'd seen what I was there to see, and so I left very soon after the reaction moment.
Okay. If I may.
thank you. Yes, sir.
Just
Can I
wanted,
mark it?
who's handing me the exhibit?
Okay. And with this exhibit, there's actually two stickers on it. One says Deposition Exhibit G, and the other is blue and has the number 1160, right?
Yes.
And the first sticker is when you were with me at the deposition, right?
I think so.
Okay. And, okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Have I struck it? Yes. I
Yes,
have.
it's a full exhibit. Let me ask, any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, so, I just wanted to ask that, because I wanted to know whether how we're gonna go with resuming testimony on Tuesday. So, Doctor, would you like Dr. Weinberg subject to recall, or can he be excused?
I believe he can be excused.
That's fine with the state, Your Honor.
Thank you. Counselor, you're free to go.
Yes, sir.
Members of the jury, just hold on a minute. I just want to talk with counsel about one, kind of the scheduling of what will be next Tuesday, because we do have a 3-day weekend coming up. We will not have court on Columbus Day. So if counsel would approach.